Welcome. So today is our Relax into Health, Wealth, and Happiness meeting, and I'm going to assume I think that what I'm going to talk about today will fall under the category or the theme of relaxing into health, wealth, and happiness, but we'll see. So, um, in the Indian tradition, it's often just a broad category, but in some of the Indian traditions that I'm familiar with, it is stated that there are four aims of life. And I find this useful just as to provide some context of why I'm sharing this. It's useful for the purpose of being able to free yourself from your own blind spots, because to the degree that we experience what we might consider suffering, um, that is born out of some kind of ignorance. And so there's something that we're not seeing. There's something that we're not, some whether it's seeing some detail, or it's seeing some greater whole, seeing some connectivity, seeing in a new way, a different perspective. Something is not being seen. There's ignorance in some form or fashion. So understanding that, then we can start to look at teaching traditions, whether those are philosophical or spiritual or religious or otherwise, whatever they may, however we may understand them or formulate them, we can start to see them as that, as a teaching, as a and as a teaching about what? As a teaching in the case of philosophy or spirituality or religion. There's some overlap there. I guess we could tease them apart and say there's slight differences. But in general, we could say that they're aimed at educating us about the nature of reality, about the nature of our experience, about who we are, and about our place in the greater whole. And so different philosophies, different schools will suggest different cosmologies and so forth. And at a certain superficial level, that can seem confusing, because we are oftentimes taught that there's just one true way and we have to find the one true way. But when we start to understand it more from a subjective perspective, then we can start to take hold of the teachings that are most appropriate or helpful to us in terms of addressing what are our blind spots. And how do we know what our blind spots are? Because that's where we hurt. Okay. Or that's where we suffer. So you'll just see there's certain patterns in your life. There's certain things that you're pretty good at. You're able to see things in a clear way. You're able to, let things roll off your back. It's you have a certain degree of competence, confidence. You have skill. You've developed skill, or you've inherited skill, or it comes naturally to you. So there are some areas of your life that are fine, and so will vary from person to person. Obviously, we can see, some people are great with money and some people are not, and some people are great with self-expression and some people are not. Some people are, great at political thinking and some people are not, and on and on and on. So back now to this business about the four aims, because the purpose here is to see that this is part of a teaching that can help us to discover our blind spots. It can shine a light on what it is that we are not seeing, or not seeing clearly, or not seeing in some way that would be useful to us. So these four aims are described as Dharma, Arta, Kama, and Moksha. Those are all Sanskrit terms. I'm giving you those terms because those are the terms that are used. And so then I'll try to give you my understanding of my interpretation of what those are pointing to, because I assume you're not fluent in Sanskrit. I'm not. So this is my understanding of what those are pointing to. So Dharma means, you could say, duty. It is what you're so what you're here for, what you're, so I look at it like this, like I have attachments to certain things. I have attachments to, like, my family, my children. So that informs me that that's a place of Dharma. That's a place of where in order to fulfill my desire in regard to this experience, I have to bring Dharma, duty. I have to learn the lessons of what Dharma is through the context of this experience, because it's not about it just being in abstract, it's about it being specific, actually experienced, embodied. Because, these are, like, we could say, abstractions in Dharma. What is Dharma? You can't just, say, here's Dharma. This isn't Dharma. There's no object called Dharma. It's an abstraction. That doesn't mean it's not real. It just means that it doesn't exist in the concrete. It's like at a different level of consciousness. But nonetheless, we can perceive it and experience it and learn about it through the specifics of our experience. So we learn about this, I would say, and this is very superficial description, understand. So don't take it all with a bit of a grain of salt, but it's just to point out some things. But you maybe could notice where you have the attachments, and you could notice what is your sense of duty there. Now, that duty can be, it's not, you can understand it as a burden, but this is not I don't think, the best way to view it. I think that's a troublesome way to view it, one that gets us into trouble. So a more useful way to view it is that it is actually your desire. You have a desire it's self-study. You say, I want to know about this. Everybody has their passions. Everybody's got their interests. Everybody's got their unique interests. And so this Dharma is about yours. Here you have a duty to really discover this, to learn about this, to learn about the Dharma itself and the specific expression of it. And they work together, because it's only through the experience, as everybody knows, because you can read books about whatever the subject may be, whether that's finance or parenting or whatever the subject matter may be, but it's only when you actually put it into practice in your actual experience that it becomes real for you. So Dharma is one of the aims of life. Arta is one that, of the four, I have to, just full disclosure, it's the one that I probably understand the least. And when you see my humble environment, I guess it kind of makes sense that in some ways, because Arta is, as I understand it, it is about the abundance and wealth, prosperity to, and I think primarily, well, it could be at all levels, but at all levels, any level, okay, whether that's emotional, psychological, spiritual, material, and it's, but it's not, it's not just for the sake of itself. It's not just having luxury. That's not really the point. It's about that abundance or that wealth or that prosperity in balance with your Dharma, with your Kama, and with your Moksha, so that it is supportive. So these are also, I think I've understood, I've read or heard at some point that these are described as these pillars, so you can understand these 4 pillars. And if any one of them, they're all supporting the same, whatever that is. And if any one of them is out of balance, then the whole thing is not balanced. So the idea here is that all 4 need to be balanced. And you can see how it plays out in your life and in other people's lives when they're not in balance. You know, somebody has a strong sense of duty, but they have no sense of abundance or prosperity, then it will be very challenging for them to fulfill their sense of duty or purpose. Kama is like pleasure. And so this is an interesting thing because, you know, I think from maybe it's just me, or maybe it's because of a Western perspective, but I have often had the sense, and it's like a puritanical kind of thing, that the only purpose of life is what we'll get to next, moksha. And so the rest of this is a complete waste of time, and that it would be better, you know, of all of them, you know, duty maybe I can get on board with, because that's a little bit like fits in with the puritanical scene, and okay, just enough Arta to be able to you know, to exercise the thing, the duty, but no more than that. But Kama, that one's, you know, that one's a challenging one, because pleasure. Well, but you see that if you don't experience adequate pleasure, then you perceive pain, you perceive loss, you perceive lack. There's, I guess lack would be more of a sense of not, it's also related to Arta, but in a different sense, it's related to, you know, to Kama, in the sense that if you don't have that, if you don't experience that kind of joie de vivre, if you can't relax, if you can't recreate, if you can't slow down and enjoy the experience, the moment as it is, if you can't smell the roses, if you can't feel in the body some pleasure, then you're likely to experience challenges, because your attention is going to be so distracted because of that imbalance, because there's a lack there. And then this takes us to moksha. So moksha, being the 4th, is liberation. So, or we could call that wakefulness to the truth of who one is. Okay. So moksha is always, I think always, I don't know about always, often, commonly understood to be the supreme aim, but so I don't know that we need to talk much about that, but I guess I'll just say that it also works to, it's not only just for itself. It can be perceived in that way, but also that moksha is supportive of the other pillars. How so? Well, as I often try to point out, that when we're so identified in the narrative, which is how most of it, you know, most of us are living that. We believe I am this personality, I am this narrative, I am this body. So that particular trance is inevitably going to be painful, because even if it's all pretty much smooth sailing, it has to come to an end. And then there will have to be reckoning with this fundamental illusion. And so, so what moksha does that is independent of its own self-luminous quality, so that it's self-contained, it's total, it's complete, it's eternal, needs nothing, lacks nothing. In addition to that, it also has this unique quality of a unique creative principle that gives aliveness and infuses this experience with abundance, pleasure, and purpose, meaning. And so when we are awake, we are able to choose wisely so that we can experience the fulfillment of Dharma, Arta, and Kama in congruence with moksha. So this is so there's that piece. Okay, now Ramana Maharshi. Okay, so you've probably heard me talk about Ramana Maharshi. You may not know much about Ramana Maharshi, but in my experience, in my estimation, an enormously powerful being of because I want to qualify it just because power in and of itself is simply power, but it's not. Ramana is not just powerful. Ramana is powerfully radical, transformative, generous, patient, any other loving. I don't know if I mentioned that. So these are very attractive qualities to me. I find them very attractive, and so an enormous influence on my own life, and one that I consider to be entirely good, although not always comfortable. And so Ramana, I don't remember where I read this, but I had read I'm sure it's in one of the books that I have. And if you're looking for books about Ramana, I would recommend. I don't know that I've read all of David Godman's books, but the ones that I have are excellent. So I can recommend, generally speaking, David Godman's books, and he's got quite a few about Ramana. But anyway, I believe I've read that he was asked by one of his students at one time about why it is that he was so uncompromising in just in this radical sharing, and why so, because there's a tradition in India, there is a tradition in India in which a long-standing tradition in which this kind of direct knowledge was not shared openly. So that's the thing, is that Ramana was sharing, or is sharing, the direct invitation of awakening. So the direct invitation of moksha. He's just saying, here it is. This is the secret. Take a look, discover that you are you are discover who you are. So, and his response was, look, this doesn't make any sense the way that it's done. He says, people go to the tradition is the people go to they have to seek out the teacher, and there's a whole bunch of obfuscation. It's not clear who anyway, it's all very confusing, and they have to submit to the teacher for a long time, to like, cleaning the guru's toilet for 5 years before they're even allowed to begin to have any instruction on these, and then on practices that are indirect. And then they have to do these indirect practices under the guidance of the guru for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, however long, before finally they're deemed ready to be given this knowledge. He says, well, why not start with this knowledge? This is the truth. Start here. And then if the shoe doesn't fit, then do the other thing. He wasn't really saying, at least my understanding is, he wasn't saying the other things are invalid. He's just saying, let's start here because this is the direct truth. And you never know if this can be directly offered and it catches like that, then the rest of it was unnecessary. We don't need to do all that other stuff. But I don't think he was, it's not my understanding that he was saying, but the other stuff should never be utilized. It was just simply saying, this is the most direct, so let's start here. Now, my experience is that so I think it's helpful to consider the stories of people who are our models, our role models, our guides, our teachers, because that can be helpful. I think, this is my experience, it can be helpful to us in determining how we can best assimilate the essence of the teacher and the teacher's message into our individual truth. Now, with some teachings and some teachers, that's maybe easier to see how that makes sense. For example, you might say, just as an example, well, I'll give you a couple examples. Okay, you might say, Moshe Feldenkrais. I really like what Moshe Feldenkrais is teaching. I really like what he has to offer, because there's something compelling there. He's saying, here's a way to feel better in the body. Here's a way to have greater confidence in the body. Here's a way to feel potent in the body, and he's living it, he's proving it, he's demonstrating it. So you said, wow, that's really attractive. I like that. I want that. Well, you want to be able to distinguish what is the essence of that teaching, and so that you can assimilate that which you want, but then not what you don't want. For example, I'm sure if you were to learn all the sordid biographical details of Moshe Feldenkrais, you would find plenty of things that you would say, I don't want that. But if you can't recognize or discriminate between the essence of what it is that you're wanting and the rest of it, then you create for yourself a lot of unnecessary struggle, because you're trying to take on things that are not a good fit for you. They're not in alignment with your purpose. You could look at this in terms of like anything. I mean, I don't even need to really give that many more examples, but you could think of any teacher or role model of any kind do you think about the role models that people have from popular culture, where they say, I want what that person has. That person is attractive. That person is confident. That person, their public persona at least exudes these certain qualities that I also want. But then the problem is that if you can't discern what's what, this is called viveka, which is that discernment. If you don't have viveka, if you can't discern, then you take it on wholesale. So then you have people who are modeling their lives after the wholesale, the public information available about celebrities, which can be disastrous because, for example, let's say a popular musician who has certain qualities they're very attractive to some individuals. They have an artistic sense, that an aesthetic sense that is popular with certain people. They communicate a message that is meaningful to some people. Maybe I don't know what other examples there might be, but then, independent of those things, maybe this particular musician also has a reckless lifestyle. Now, not all the people who appreciate the aesthetic or the message also really want to have that same chaotic, destructive lifestyle. They would like to be able to have discernment, to be able to say, I can choose the aesthetic without having to have that particular lifestyle. But most people aren't able to do that. So they just take it on wholesale, for better or for worse. So okay, so now here's the point I wanted to make, though, with this, is that with Ramana, with others who are considered to be saintly, perfect, then we tend to make a mistake there, because then we think, well, in their case, you have to take it on wholesale. You have to take all of it wholesale. But I want to, it's really important, I think, to understand that that's not necessarily in your best, well, almost certainly not in your best interest. Because if you wanted to take the enormous benefit of Ramana's message, or let's say an even more popular example would be Jesus. Very powerful, very, very powerful message, very useful message, very powerful, useful teaching. But if you are unable to sort out what is what, then you just have to take it on wholesale. Well, then you're going to be crucified. You see, you don't want that. So with Ramana was, for all intents and purposes, Ramana was an ascetic. And that's probably not for you. That's just, you've got bills to pay. You've got families to care for. You've got, all these other things, that businesses to run and whatever else. That's just not for you. But that doesn't mean that the message isn't for you. It just means that that aspect of the expression of the teacher is not for you. And it's important to see that there are examples of those who have received Ramana's message, who are ascetics, and there are examples of those who received Ramana's message who are householders. And so we want to understand that it's the message, it's the core essence, the truth that's being pointed to, which is simply notice who you are. And I say simply, it doesn't, simple and yet eternal. It's not a thing, like one and done. You can check that off your bucket list of things to do, like I know who I am. It's an eternal thing. It's an eternal union with yourself, which is a living process. All right, so now, given that you are not an ascetic, you're a householder, you're using the internet, that almost certainly disqualifies you from being an ascetic. So you have you actually are not going to focus only on moksha. You have Dharma, Arta, and Kama also to consider. And you'll see that these are the areas in which you experience pain. So you can start to just kind of notice that you have these areas that are painful to you, and that they generally can be categorized under Dharma, Arta, or Kama. So what are some examples? Let's say you feel that you have something that you want to accomplish, something, like you've got something in you that's got to be expressed before you die. Well, that's Dharma. So these are your attachments. These are your desires. Now, in the ascetic world, the desires are kind of, we could say, bad almost. They're not really bad, but we look at them in a simplistic way. We could say they're bad, or they're the obstacles, or they're the lessons. They're always lessons. That's a true statement. But there's something to be dissolved. There's something to be seen through. There's something to not act out in the world. And that's a valid path, but it's also a valid path to allow yourself to work out these lessons, these desires, in this life, in this lifetime. And that's not inherently bad or problematic. It's simply one way, and it's apparently your desire. So recognizing that, you want to work intelligently with it. That's the point. So if you have, so that's one example. Let's look at Arta. Maybe you just have a sense of frustration that you're not able to, you don't have the energy, you don't have the time, you don't have the financial resources, you don't have the social connections to be able to do what you want, to be able to achieve your goals, or to be able to help yourself to experience the pleasure that you want. So that would be an indication that there are lessons there of Arta. And then you could have, in regard to Kama, you could have just a sense of a lack of pleasure. So you would generally have a sense of kind of dryness in your life, a sense of, it wouldn't have to be only dryness. I mean, that's one manifestation, but it would be a sense of, it could be pain, physical pain, could be psychological pain, I guess it could be emotional pain, because it's a blocking or a perception that you're blocked from experiencing pleasure, and you have a desire for pleasure. You have a desire that there's some belief or some programming in you says that you shouldn't, that it's bad, that it's a problem somehow, that it will, just somehow be problematic. So there are a couple of difficulties, a couple of challenges here. Okay, probably the biggest one is a lack of awareness, or that is to say, ignorance about what these things are in our lives. Because a lot of the status quo, what we are led to, what the dominant public narrative that I'm aware of, at least in the United States, but I think probably largely worldwide at this point, because it's a very dominant energy presently, is that there's no purpose to anything. Nothing matters. That it's all just about, it's all empty, and it's, it's just trying to get empty power, empty pleasure, empty everything. It's all empty. It's all pointless. You don't matter. Nothing matters. It's painfully seems to matter to you, but it's all an illusion anyway. This is like postmodernism. Okay. And so we kind of can struggle with even getting out of that malaise or fog that's generated by that absolute relativism, in order to be able to even get some clarity, just to get a foothold on what do I want? What am I here for? Who am I? Not just as pure consciousness, not to diminish the importance of that, but in terms of in this expression, in this unique individuation. You can ignore it all you want, but it doesn't actually resolve what's unresolved. Instead, those things remain unresolved, and they just keep on nagging at us. So it's all the nagging, all the pain, all the frustration, all that stuff is an ongoing invitation for you to engage in a positive way with this life, with this experience, this dynamism. So I've been thinking about, there's a couple things. Well, the bigger context here is that I am interested in how to say this. I'm interested in the phrase that comes to mind is optimal experience. That doesn't capture the whole essence of it, but that's one way to say it. Okay, so I'm interested in optimized experience, and I would say you are too. I mean, I know that unconsciously, this is true. Unconsciously, a lot of people are disinterested in optimized experience, only because they perceive that what's necessary for optimized experience is insurmountable. Like, actually, optimized experience is impossible for them, or it would be too painful or too scary, or whatever may be the case. But deeper down, in essence, I think everybody, if not at least most people, have a fundamental desire for optimized experience. There's an ideal, there exists within us an ideal that we know, and that ideal is what we would call self, with the capital S. And so that exists in us, and we know it intimately because it is us, and we desire to bring that into expression, and in a concrete, distinct, unique way. Not in the ideal, but because the ideal is eternal. The ideal is always there, but we want to play and know it in a very unique way. And so that is, that's what we want. That's the purpose of our life. That's the desire that's there. And but as I say, the number one problem is that most people can't even break out of the general malaise and fog in order to be able to even recognize that, or recognize that that even could be okay. Because most people are just so terrified. They just want to stay within the confines of the imaginary safety. But when you wake up to a certain extent, which I'd say maybe everybody here, probably most people here have woken up, at least to this point, you can see, that's not going to do it for me. Being safe isn't going to do it for me, because there's, in that safety, it's death. It's not aliveness. It's not truth. It's not the truthful expression of this uniqueness that must be discovered, that must be played out, that must be fulfilled. So that's the number one problem. But then even after this is glimpsed, so that much is glimpsed, which is, I'm proposing you probably have glimpsed that much at least. The next problem that arises, because that revelation shows you then that there's something beyond. There's something beyond the confines of the status quo. You don't know it until you do. Sort of like, if you think about, if you've ever seen David Lynch, any of David Lynch's film, well, I don't know about any, but some of them, like they're disturbing, maybe depends on your interpretation. So I don't recommend that you go out and watch them necessarily, but if you have seen any of them, like Blue Velvet or Mulholland Drive, or I don't know, I'm not thinking of any of the others, but if you've seen either of those, then so that's like, there's a reality, and then it seems real, and it's all, especially Blue Velvet, it starts out, it's just like perfect American suburbia. Everything is just so perfect. It couldn't be more perfect. And then it just all goes really strange from there. And, it's revealed that there's a whole, it's very Plutonian. There's this whole like violent, secret underworld that's controlling everything, and nothing that appears to be real is real. It's all fake. So when this kind of disillusionment occurs, then it's hard to go back. It's like in the Matrix movies when Neo is given the option by Morpheus, take the red pill or take the blue pill. It's kind of like that kind of thing. You can't take the blue pill. That's not going to happen. You've awoken to this, and so that now the only possibility is to proceed. Well, then the problem is, and for many of you, I would assume this is the big problem, is you say, holy cow, proceed. What? I don't even know where to begin. How do I proceed? And you'll encounter this time and time again, because we keep constructing new plateaus, because we don't necessarily believe we have the fortitude to just keep on the ascent always. It's like we say, okay, hold on, I need to hang out here for a little while. So we construct this plateau, which is always mostly false, because at best it's capturing something, some semi-truthful snapshot of some moment of change, but it's actually all eternal change. This is really more the truth. But we tend to construct these plateaus, and so then we'll go back through the cycle again, because eventually that plateau, it gets so out of sync with the actuality of the constant flux that's going on that it's no longer tenable. And you see this happen in your own personal life. You see it happen more broadly in culture, where there are these sort of, these moments where the old way goes, and you can look historically. I mean, there are many of them, but they're distinct. These distinct moments when, if you think back, I was a child during the tail end of the Cold War. I mean, I was born in 1978, but I was in throughout most of my early childhood. The Russians were the enemy. The Soviets were to be feared. They were the other. They were foreign. They were terrifying. They were the evil villains. From the American perspective, I don't know what it was for, it depends where you lived, I guess. But then all of a sudden, there was Gorbachev and Reagan, and like, how did this happen? They're like best buddies all of a sudden. Like, hallelujah, the Cold War is over. We don't have to have this enemy anymore. I mean, almost most everybody here, most of you are older. Well, half of you are older than I am. And so you'll remember it probably quite vividly. But there are many of these things, these things that just happen, that are the old way was no longer tenable. It was a stagnation. So we tend to go through these both as a collective and individually in our lives. And so we want to know really how it is that we can be more skillful in navigating. This is the point. We want to know how we can be more skillful in navigating this dream, this appearance, because we can go, all directions are relative, but I'll just say from top down or bottom up. Top down, in this case, it's all relative, which is meaning from the recognition of oneness, pure consciousness, formlessness, from that down into increasing levels of gross manifestation, or from the bottom up, meaning from the grossest level of manifestation up to the formless, beyond subtle. So increasing subtlety until we pop into the supreme union that's transcendent of subtlety, of that polarity of subtlety and gross. So when I emphasize things like, like the three-step inquiry is like a top-down. So that's one approach, and it's useful, it's valuable, it's important, and that could be all that's necessary. It's not that you need other things, but if we want to work intelligently, the purpose of which is to allow us to have optimized experience, meaning we can feel better, enjoy more, have more clarity of purpose. So Dharma, more of a sense of empowerment in our purpose, Arta, and more of a sense of enjoyment, of fulfillment of our purpose, which is Kama. So, if that sounds bad to you, I guess, I don't know what to say about that. But if it sounds good to you, like that you could enjoy your life more, that could be congruent with and supportive of moksha, so that they're not antagonistic, that worldly success is not opposed to spiritual attainment, that they actually are compatible, and that they are mutually supportive, at least potentially. So a couple of things I'll say about this, and this might seem, well, these are some, okay, so these are, when we think about top down, we've got a lot of types of meditation, and a lot of types of meditation. Maybe there are other examples, but that is that's one tool that's available to us. That's awesome. It's essential, almost, I would say. And if that's all that we take hold of, if that's all that we make use of, then I believe that we are selling ourselves short. We're not really fulfilling our purpose. We're holding back unnecessarily when what you think yourself to be, not who you really are, but what you think yourself to be, is really only that expression, and it wants, your desire really is to allow that expression, but it's restrained. It's restrained. You can feel it. It's restrained or constrained, held back by fear and ignorance. So we want to learn. There are certain, we could say, lessons in life that allow us to have success in this life. Self-mastery, which is another way of saying self-knowledge. And so there are a variety of these. There's many different techniques and approaches that are available here, but I want to talk about at least one. I know we're getting almost at noon, so I don't know if I'll have time to talk about more than one, but I'll talk about at least one. And I guess somewhat briefly, because something I could talk a lot more about, but I'll briefly talk about this approach to more successful living, self-knowledge, which is we could call worship. And so worship is one of those words that if you're not somebody who already has a positive relationship with worship, then you'll have some other relationship with it, I guess. So you could just notice what your relationship is with that word, what that means to you. Because, it's just a word. It's just a sound. But what it means to you, you can notice that. So how do you feel about that? Do you have a positive association with the word worship, or a negative association, a neutral association? Are you attracted to it, repulsed by it? What opinions, judgments, and so forth do you have about it? And just notice. It's fine. Now, I'm going to propose to you an understanding of what worship is and how it can be beneficial. So, and I think you'll see that this is congruent with most other understandings of worship, but you may, people who have other definitions of worship may have a less complete definition of it than what I'm going to propose. And I think the more complete the definition, the more helpful it can be to us, because then we can remove superstition and we can make use of it in an intelligent and efficient way so that we can benefit. So here's my understanding, my definition of worship presently, a working definition, is that we're talking about so worship is a dualistic process. So it's not a non-dual process. Worship is something that's done from bottom up. So there's a sense of being someone separate, and there's something that is I should take that back. It's not a prerequisite. It could be, you actually could, according to my definition, you could have non-dual worship. So I'll take that part back about it. So that's not a requirement. It does not have to be dualistic. You could perceive yourself to be a one or a separate individual. Either one could work. But there's some archetypal energy that you would like to cultivate, that you would like, that is attractive to you, and you want to have a better understanding and expression of that archetypal energy. So, for example, you might perceive that you are that people just kind of walk all over you, so to speak, metaphorically. Hopefully not literally, but that would be a different issue, related, but maybe more extreme. But metaphorically, that people walk all over you, that you feel like you can't get a word in edgewise, and you kind of have a timid quality. You don't feel, you can assert yourself, and that strikes you as being incongruent with your deeper desires. Like, you have a desire, you sense that your purpose involves asserting yourself, expressing yourself in some way, that this timidity or lack of assertiveness interferes with. And so you want to cultivate that quality of assertiveness. Well, then you can worship assertiveness. Now, I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure, I'm kind of sure, that because of how we are, because of our wiring, we will do best. It will be the most efficient experience if we worship that as an archetype rather than as some abstract. Well, I guess archetypes are somewhat abstract, but in a way that's sufficiently complex as to kind of have a sense of a persona to it, so that we can have a sense of relationship with it. Now, I guess this depends on whether it's dual or non-dual. But if it's dual, then I think we're probably going to find it most efficient to have a persona that we're associating with that we can worship. I don't know that for sure, but if you think about this practice of worship, it struck me that it's an ancient practice, and I know that in the common modernist and postmodern, this industrial, scientific, rational, sterile, there's only one absolute truth, and we can find it if we separate all bias. That kind of energy that predominates. What was I going to say about this? Gosh, I don't remember. I went off on that little tangent. I don't remember what I was saying. But the main point here is that from that perspective, of the modern perspective, we can maybe have a hard time with worship, in a sense, with the idea of worship, but we can start to understand it. Oh, this is what I was going to say, is that worship is an ancient activity, and from the modern perspective, we tend to think, well, it's all progressive. We're progressing from primitive to advanced, and so all of that old way, all that business of worship and deities and all that kind of business, that's outmoded. It was ignorant, it's stupid, it's pointless, it's superstitious, and we won't have anything to do with it. unless we're worshiping science, but or capitalism. But the the point is that if we do that, then we're ignorant of the very fact that we are worshiping something, and then that's true. People are worshiping all the time, but they just don't see that they're doing it because worship has been given a falsely narrow definition culturally, so that we think, well, worship is only for people, it's only for Christians or Muslims, and it's only when they're, doing their ritual, that's worship. But when we understand it in a more broader sense, then we understand that there's something that we are cultivating. We're choosing to turn our attention to that and to declare it good. We're saying that's desirable. I want that. So people are worshiping cultural icons. They're worshiping celebrities. They're worshiping particular philosophies like Marxism or capitalism or democracy or whatever may be the case. They're declaring it good, and they're thinking about it. They're imagining it. They're investing themselves in it. They're relating to it. You see, that's how all of these things, like, how did they come into being? How did communism come into being? How did democracy come into being? How did a democratic republic come into being? How did capitalism come into being? How did any of these things come into being? Well, because they were imagined, or they were brought forth through the imagination, or they were brought forth through some means of expression, and then they were made into a living reality because people began to worship them. They began to reflect upon them and elaborate upon them, get into the details of it and flesh it out. And so it became a living thing, expressed. Now, the same is true on all levels, not just at a cultural level, but in our own individual lives. So you want to consider what you're worshiping, and if that's really congruent with what you want. Because again, well, think about, like, there may be things in your life that, just because you found some value in them at an earlier stage of your life, you still have an affection or a nostalgia or an attachment to. But if you start, so in a sense, you're still worshiping them because you're still declaring them good and desirable. But some of those things may not actually be congruent with what you really want at this stage. So taking a look and to see, what are the things that I'm worshiping? What are the beliefs that I'm holding? And what are the ideals that I'm clinging to, that I'm bringing into expression in my life? So so that's one way, is you can look critically at your life, critically not in harsh judgment, but critically in the sense of just with discernment, viveka, so that you can start to see, this is true, this is not true. This is who I want to be. This is not who I want to be. This is what I consider good. That's what I consider not to be good. And to really start to have some clarity around that for yourself, so that you can start to see what are these beliefs? What are the things I'm worshiping? What are the things that I invest my time and energy into? What do I imagine a great deal of? Now you start to see how much you worship fear. So the more that we worship fear, the more, like anything, the more of that we experience. So then it starts to become maybe clearer that you have a choice. Now, because if you're in the habit of worshiping fear, then anytime anything happens, that's your God. You go down and pray to fear. And if you don't think that's true, I invite you to take a closer look, because I promise you it is. When the moment occurs and you say, I'm going to fear, because fear is your main God. Unless it's Jesus, or Buddha or Krishna or whatever. Now, here's the power: is you want a God that's more powerful than fear, and because you're tired of serving fear, you're tired of worshiping fear. Now, it's not that fear is bad. Please understand, fear is not the enemy. Fear is just an archetype. It's an energy, and it's neither good nor bad. It has value, potentially. In potential, fear is good. Fear is why you don't, classical example is why you don't burn your hand on the stove repeatedly. You had the experience, you learned from it. So fear can be helpful in learning. Fear has an energy of contraction. Now, is contraction inherently bad? No. Think about it. If you have cancer, do you want just unabated growth, or do you want some contraction? You want some contraction around the cancer. So it's all relative. And so fear is not bad, but the problem is that when that's your go-to, when that's your primary God, and you worship that above all others, which you can know, because in the moment of intensity, where do you go down and pray? And you can see you pray in the temple of fear most of the time. So you want to start to notice that that's what you do, and see that you have a choice. And that's the power of choosing your God. And so there's a tradition in India of what's called an Ishta Deva, or I think it's called an Ishta Deva, which is your personal God. So, there's more freedom of choice there. They don't take it quite as seriously as a lot of people do in, say, the United States, where, because Christianity is a proselytizing religion. And so it's has that energy of it's a jealous God. You got to think about Christianity or Judaism. Really, when we talk about a jealous God, we're really talking about the God of the Israelites describes himself as a jealous God. You shall worship none other than me. So there you have, the energy of that, and it's not bad, powerful. Think about it. That's the energy that it's described in the story. That's the energy that took the Hebrews out of slavery. Really powerful, super powerful. So guess what? If you perceive that you are enslaved, that's a really good God to worship. Maybe. And so, think about that. But it's not a one size fits all, because it's not that high level. Sorry. So we want to choose who we worship, and we can look intelligently just to see. They are all telling us what their message is. So we want to see what messages are the right messages. What are those higher level messages, those higher level teachings that I know intuitively are true, that are in alignment with what I want in life. I want what? Peace, harmony, love, kindness. Well, then you start to notice, well, who are the gods that, who are the avatars? Who are the archetypes that represent that they're like a bridge to from the absolute to the individuated. They provide that bridge so that we can bring that energy into expression through ourselves, through our lives. So, so now, when I'm saying uh, that can become, well, I've opened up a can of worms, I guess. I guess I've opened up a can of worms, and we'll talk about it more in the coming weeks. But because I can't go into too much more detail without it opening up another can of worms. But we'll just say that, just notice that much. Just see when in the times of intensity, where do you start worshiping? You go to some temple to worship within your own consciousness, and is that really what you're wanting in your life? And if you go to fear, if you start panicking and you're experiencing anxiety, or if you're going to anger, resentment, revenge, or if you're going to like despondency, despair, depression, well, just see, you don't really want to do that. Now, do those are those invalid gods? Do they never have a valid purpose? Of course not. Of course they're valid. Of course they have potential utility, but you don't want those to be your main go-tos, because that doesn't support you in what you want. So you need to start to see that you have a choice. Now, this is the power when people have like they're born again, for example. It is really that powerful, because you think about what's happening is you're saying, my basis, you think, in the New Testament, there's a parable about the two men who build their houses. One builds their house on the sand and one builds their house on the rock. And the teaching is, be like the man who builds his house on the rock, meaning that you have a solid foundation that, and it's being said, the rock is that highest God, that highest truth, that which is most good, that which is most truthful. And so that's where you want your foundation, so that when everything is stripped away from you, in those moments of great intensity, in those moments of seeming crisis, that when you're brought back to your very foundation, shaken to your core, that what you find there is that rock, that is the rock of truth, that you're not brought to these unstable things like fear, anxiety, frustration, revenge, anger, depression, and despair. Instead, that you're brought to peace, love, harmony, confidence, like true confidence, the confidence that comes from knowing a oneness and connection being taken care of. You want that kind of foundation. You want that for your life, and that's available when you powerfully in this conversion experience, because like in a flash, there's all that old stuff is swept away, and in its place is this new greater reality, new greater truth. So you can wait for that to happen, or you can just choose. And I would recommend that you choose, because if you're waiting, who knows how long you'll be waiting. The experiences do apparently happen. We read about them, and oftentimes we are very attracted to them, because we feel like, I don't know what else to do. I guess I have to wait for that, some kind of unexpected conversion experience to happen. Like, I mean, the examples abound. There's so many of them, cross-culturally, where there's usually some kind of crisis, and then a sudden awakening or conversion, or whatever you want to consider it. And so you could continue to hold out and wait for that, but I don't recommend it. I think it's much more useful to be more methodical about it. So my encouragement is, you look and see first what it is that where you're worshiping. Just see that you're in the moments of distress, or in the moments of intensity, or in the moments of seeming crisis or urgency, or whatever it may be. Then where do you go out of habit? And start to notice that you don't like that. Unless you do. I mean, maybe you go good places, but in which case, great, cultivate that. But when you notice that you go worship in bad places, I shouldn't say bad, and when you worship in places that are not supportive of what you want in those moments of intensity, you owe it to yourself to invest in yourself, forming a new habit, uh, a new relationship with life, so that and how do you do that? You just, every time that it happens, you wake up, you just remember, you feel the pain, you connect with that pain, the association that when I experience this pain, I remember to wake up. I remember that I have choice. That's the key. Okay. That, because you have to remember to wake up. And in order to remember, you need to program that into your experience. You have to choose that. You have to connect it with something that's happening, so that you say, okay, I see that every time that I go in that weird direction, I'm experiencing pain. So now every time I experience pain, I remember that when I experience pain, I wake up. So then you experience the pain and you wake up, and then you say, okay, now when I'm awake, what do I do? So you have to sequentially remember. You're helping yourself. You're setting into motion a new habit. So okay, what do I do now? I'm awake. Okay. Oh yes, I look to see where I was going. I was going to the temple of fear. I was ready. I had all my, accoutrement ready so that I could go there and do the whole ritual, but I won't. So you recognize it, you're awake, and you see, I don't want to go there anymore. Then you choose, where do you want to go? What is good? What is good for you? What is good in your experience? Is what a what opens you to that sense of purpose, to that sense of uh, empowerment, and that sense of pleasure and enjoyment. And what opens you to all three of those is going to be a good thing, because that's going to support you in a balanced, happy life that's free of all the unnecessary suffering, and that also gives liberation. So hopefully I've made that clear. If not, then you can always let me know, but not now, because we're going to wrap up rather. And so I hope that you have a wonderful weekend. I hope that you reflect on this and that it's valuable to you. Blessings to you all, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.